America and Illinois have both gotten to a place that's very far from social and economic justice. And one of the people that this committee, or whatever you call it, the name is too, it's almost as bad as our name, Ron. You really got to do something with it, with all the names or whatever. Eugene V. Debs. The guy was a visionary, right? I mean, he was so committed to his cause that he ran for president from prison, which should resonate in Illinois. I mean, if only the folks that want to run for governor here would just start there so we would save the taxpayers' money. But the big lesson from Eugene Debs is standing up for the rights of workers and workers' right to earn a wage that could provide for a family. Reference was already made to the railway strike back in 1894. Debs, as the first ever president of the American Railway Union, called that strike in response to George Pullman's decision to cut wages for workers. The reason for Pullman's decision was pretty simple. He wanted more for them that's got, and he wanted to take away from them who don't. Debs says that is wrong. He started the strike here in Chicago. It spread to 27 states. What would he think about today in America and Illinois? He'd look at us, our nation, after this recession, and what would he see? What would the changes be? You know, in that 2-year period, and yes, you are going to be stuck hearing numbers from me. In that 2-year period, 07 to 09, a lot of things changed. Wall Street and Main Street. On Main Street, home equity down 35%. Unemployment at the end of that 2-year period up 102%. Main Street felt that recession. How about Wall Street? Profits up 720% that 2-year period. What caused that recession? Can someone remind? That's right. Wall Street. Financial derivatives. Goofy security investments backed by nothing, resold 1 million times a house of cards. They crashed the economy, and it didn't, not only didn't it cost them a nickel, their profits soared. And while it's true that Wall Street actually caused that recession, they were sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, there was a longer-term cause, and it's one that you in this room ought to be concerned about. And that's a decline in wages for working Americans. When George W. Bush took office, Americans, hardworking Americans, their wages accounted for half of America's gross domestic product. By the time he left, 8 years later, they were dropped down to 46%. That 4 points probably doesn't sound like a lot to you. You know what it meant in the pockets of Americans? $487 billion less in earnings. 487. How many fewer mortgage foreclosures would there be? How much less credit debt if each of those years Americans were earning $487 billion more dollars? Now, this wasn't an accident. This was the outcome of intentional policies and intentional assaults on 3 institutions, one of which is sort of a combined thing. The public sector in general and public education in specific have been under attack since 1980. The other major institution that's been under attack since 1980 has been unions. Why would that be? Well, you know, we've done some research, and it's interesting. The 2 things proven in a modern economy to drive up the wage of workers, 2 things, are educational attainment and union membership. Those two things are the only two things that a worker can count on to increase his or her wage. They're under attack. The public sector gives a darn about the public sector. I mean, heck, state government, what's it spend its money on? Education, number one. Healthcare, number two. Human services protecting vulnerable people, number three. Public safety, number four. Who wants to protect that? Rich folks ain't got a card in that game. And the change has not only been intentional, it has been dramatic. So now let me throw some numbers at you. From the end of World War II until 1980, our economy in America grew, on average, after inflation, in real terms, by 3.8% per year. That was the average economic growth. During that time, the bottom 90% of income earners in our country, bottom 90%, most of us, got 65% of all income growth. Two-thirds, pretty good, not proportionate. Top 10% still got over 33%, but still pretty good. Then we got the Reagan Revolution in 1980. Who here has heard of supply-side economics? Anybody? Here's the theory. Here's the theory. Supply-side economics, you cut taxes on the really rich. This will free up so much more of their income, because Lord knows they need that freed up, that they will invest in creating jobs for us. It will trickle down. The economy will explode. It'll grow at a much faster rate. You create all these great jobs. And even though you are cutting tax rates on the richest people with the most money, which if, I don't know how ideological you are, so let's take this out of the realm of ideology. If you do math, it seems like a curious way to raise revenue. You're cutting the rate on the biggest pot. No, no, no. Supply side says the economy will grow so fast that not only won't you lose revenue, you will gain it. What has reality been? From 1981 to 2007, we cut taxes on the wealthy. In fact, in that World War II to 1980 period, the marginal tax rate on the richest Americans varied from 71 to 90%. Very high tax rates, very high. Reagan cut them down to 38%. George W. Bush, in the year 2000, cut them again, down to 35. So did this boost our economy? Did it trickle down? Let me think about it. No, no, it did not. Average gross domestic product growth in America before these big tax cuts for the rich was 3.8% a year. Afterwards, 2.8% a year. We lost a full point in economic growth a year. That's millions of jobs. Better yet, did it trickle down? Did we benefit? No, we did not. That same time period, the share in income flipped so that the bottom 90% only got about 35% of all income growth, and the top 10% cornered 65%. Completely flipped. From 2000 to 07, the bottom 90% got, well, the word is bupkis, nothing. It all went to the top. This is intentional policy. And as far as revenues, well, let's think about this. We've cut the tax rate on the people who are earning all the money, all of it. So no, revenues didn't keep up, they didn't grow, they never returned to prior trends. So with revenue falling and falling, it suddenly becomes an issue to cut spending on programs for poor and middle-income families to balance the budget and finance tax cuts to the richest Americans. And I want to give you a number to remember. If the rate of share in income growth in America had just remained where it was before 1980, the bottom 90% from 1980 to 07 would have earned $900 billion more in income. Instead, that $900 billion was shifted to the wealthiest 10%. A radical redistribution of wealth to the wealthy. And yet, we can have people like Congressman Ryan taken seriously for not only suggesting he's going to balance the budget by slashing spending on public services that provide a hand up to those in need, he's also suggesting an even bigger tax cut for the wealthy. According to the Congressional Budget Office, his proposal will increase the deficit by $6 trillion to finance tax cuts to the wealthy. What would Debs think of that? Well, then there's Illinois. I almost, when it comes to our lovely state, I almost don't know where to begin. But I'll begin maybe with education. You know, out of all 50 states, Illinois ranks 49th in the portion of education funding it covers from state resources, 49th out of 50. That has pushed the primary obligation to fund schools down to local property taxes. That effectively ties the quality of a public education that any child in our state's going to receive to the wealth of the community in which the kid lives. Now, I've heard a lot of people say money doesn't matter in education. In fact, I'm serving with a few of them on that commission in D.C., and they don't like me already. But I want to talk a little bit about money and education from a personal level, and this, Dave, is based on our conversation at the table. I forgot that I had said this stuff a while back. I live in River Forest. River Forest is not a poor community. We might actually have a zoning ordinance against poverty. It's a relatively wealthy area. And I want you to know what my child gets in his public school, in addition to his core curriculum. So yeah, he's got all the regular classes. He's got a great books class. He's got his choice of 4 foreign languages. He was handed a personal computer. He's got a science lab, math lab, chess club. Each child is given 20 orchestral instruments to try and then given lessons in them. I could go on, but the point is my son began getting this stuff in 1st grade. Now, if you don't think what we're putting into his education with the money we're spending in River Forest is giving him an advantage over a kid in Englewood, or Bellwood, or East St. Louis, or Marion, or Peoria, share what you're smoking with the rest of the room. We all want to be that happy. Of course it makes a difference. I'll tell you what else it's done. It's created, this reliance on property taxes has created one of the most racist educational systems in America. More than 50 years after Martin Luther King gave that brilliant speech, we are still separate. Illinois is the 3rd most segregated state in the nation when it comes to our K through 12 educational system. Of course, this is Illinois, so right, we're not just still separate, we're still unequal. These minority school districts start off with over $1,200 less per kid per school year, K through 12, and have for decades. Now, what did I say mattered? to being competitive in a modern global economy? Educational attainment. From 1980 to 07, do you know what happened to the wage gap between whites and blacks in Illinois? It got worse by 126%. Now, for those who claim race no longer plays a role in labor markets, that we're colorblind, I think you're pretty blind to the data. And it really doesn't matter how you slice this data. I want to be very clear on this. When you compare like kinds, you see racially disparate economic outcomes. Examples. Hardest to employ are people without a high school diploma, right? You don't have a high school diploma, it's awful hard to get a job these days. Before the recession started, whites who did not have a high school diploma in Illinois had an unemployment rate of just over 11%. Blacks, 27%. In fact, the unemployment rate for whites in Illinois after the recession ended of about 8.8% was around half of what the unemployment rate was for blacks before the recession started. You want more? The highest earners all have a college degree or better. If you're white and you're in that category and you live in Illinois, chances are you're a top income earner. In fact, 54% of the whites are in that top 5% income class. If you're a black, not quite so lucky, 27%. So it doesn't matter how you slice this data, certainly racial discrimination is impacting labor markets, but so is how we fund schools. If, in fact, you rely predominantly on that local property tax to fund education, and most minorities live in poverty, and guess what? Over 50% of our African American children are in the 5% of school districts with the greatest poverty. Over 94% of our African American children live in school districts with concentrated poverty levels of 30% or above. Poverty becomes a huge barrier to academic attainment at 25%. If you rely on the property tax, and these children live in a community with no property wealth, they cannot get a quality education because we can't pay for it. You can't fix that without investing more in state government. You can't fix that even with this historic tax increase that John Cameron, William McNary fought so hard with me and others in this room to make happen. And really, your efforts were both crucial. And William McNary, you know, he does not get enough credit for the good work he does. Well, can we just give him a hand? And someday, let's just make up an award like the Good Guy for Illinois Award and give it to William McNary, and I want to hand it to him. So, we've come to a point in America and in our state where the word government means problem, bad. Got to change that. The public sector creates significant opportunity for those who need assistance. It's a hand up, not a handout. If you live in a community of poverty, you'd like to have a safe area to come back home to. You don't want guns going on. You don't want the gangs in the street. That costs money. You need some counseling services. You might need domestic violence protection. You might need substance abuse protection. You might need someone to pay some child care support so that you can put your kid in a safe environment while you take your job. Illinois is slashing spending on every one of those items this year. In fact, our human services budget alone has been singled out for $389 million in cuts from last year, 2011. Last year was no bed of roses for human services. They were cut $240 million from 2010. It's huge. It's dishonest. It's counterproductive. If we're going to move forward in America, we have to understand that it's going to take a community effort, intelligent investment in the public sector, access to a quality education for every child, and a very strong labor movement so that American workers can share in the productivity gains that they are creating for our nation. I'm honored to be among a room of people who have worked their lives to make that kind of social and economic justice a reality. And I look forward to working with you to create a better Illinois and America. Thank you.